Hey guys, Jim Vinosky with Manufacturing Talks here. Today we've got Ian Peterman with us. He has his own design firm out in LA, helps people with product design, process design of manufactured products with the angle of sustainability and circularity and all that stuff. He's here to tell us all about what he does, and trust me, he does a whole lot beyond just that. So stay tuned for Ian joining us in just a few seconds, and we'll go through all the cool stuff he has going on right here on Manufacturing Talks.
Welcome to Manufacturing Talks with Jim Vinosky. Industry has a million cool stories, and Jim talks to the movers and shakers who are making them happen. Let's dive in.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Manufacturing Talks. I'm Jim Vinosky, your host. I'm joined today by Ian Peterman. He is the CEO of his own design firm, aptly named Peterman Design Firm. Welcome. How are you, Ian?
I'm great. Thanks for having me on the show, Jim.
Thanks for coming on the show. Boy, oh boy, we got a lot to cover, and I promised to get you free in not too long. So we're going to dive right in. But before we do, why don't you just give us kind of the brief story of your background?
Yeah, well, I usually start when I wanted to get into design when I was about 12. I really decided that was what I wanted to do. And then kind of the fast version is I did contracting work for my dad, learned a lot of CAD. I ended up working with a company. I got an internship when I was 16 doing telecommunications lasers. I was the CAD monkey. All the engineers gave me all the stuff they didn't want to do, which was all the boring CAD stuff. So it was a great learning experience. I learned a ton about manufacturing, all the stuff that they found boring. So the uncool stuff, but very valuable
stuff.
Yeah. And then from there, I worked at HP. I've worked at some big companies. I've worked at some small companies. And then about a decade ago now, I was a founding partner at my first design firm. So I was one of 4 partners, ran that for a couple of years. Most of them got tired of doing the agency life. It was a bit of a grind. And I took a break. I was the only one that came back that wanted to do a full firm again. Uh-huh. And in 2017, I launched the Peterman Design Firm. And I've been doing it ever since.
All right. So tell us about Peterman Design Firm. What do you focus on? What's your specialty?
Yeah. So we've shifted over the years. I think it's always a journey to figure out what you're really good at and the niche. But we've always focused on really the design and engineering side of things. And now what we really kind of narrow that down to is we come in typically as like an R&D partner on companies wanting to launch new products, redesign products, and then we work heavily in the sustainability space, both in fresh new products, but also really working with companies to transition over, because it's not just a 1 and a 0. There's a lot of work if you really want your product line to become sustainable. It doesn't happen in a day. There's a lot to go into it, and so we work with companies to help transition them, their supply chain, design practices, things like that.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Cool.
So, yeah.
So I was going to say, when it comes to that kind of thing, there's a lot of different elements. You touched on some of them, but materials is an important one. And you actually also are a co-founder of a materials company as well, right?
Yeah. So that one, we're probably going into hiatus with that one right now. But yeah, we spent 3 years very much in just material research, and was
that focused on sustainability?
Yeah, so that was focused on figuring out what can you do with hemp. Basically, that was our primary, really the only material that we focused on, and it was just exploring what industrial uses, right? Because as soon as the Farm Bill passed, quite a few years ago now, finally there's enough production of it, so we're looking at, well, how do we use this? production
Okay.
really scales, what can what can we do in the market? And there's a ton
Yeah.
of uses for it. But yeah, it's a fun material research is fun. It's just
Got it. And then what are the other kind of big buckets of helping a company move in that direction?
in towards being more sustainable
Yeah.
or
Yep. Sorry. Should have spelled that
yeah.
out. Right.
um, there is so as you said, there's so much when you get into
Yep.
manufacturing, right? There's material selection, there's your supply chain, there's how you even design things, assembly processes. Um, think how you think about things is even different than normal kind of approach. And so when we work with a company, and I'll have to add, we also on the back end, we have like branding and packaging as well, because that's usually
Yep.
you get to communicate what we're doing. And packaging is always a very key part of sustainability. It's also the easy low hanging fruit. Basically,
Yeah.
everybody can start there. So we touch on that because it's usually an integrated part of it. But there's so many touch points to it. There's, something that we look at the beginning of a lot of projects is really the life cycle. And that's
Yep.
one of those things. If you want to be efficient, want to be sustainable, either one of those, looking at your full life cycle and how can you recapture the value, right? So like the example we all know is Apple likes to take all their phones back. And it's useful. It's material that they can use. They sell it back. All kinds of reasons that you could do that. And so it's looking at it on a system level, as well as the individual things that we think about, like the packaging can be recycled.
Yep.
Like that's the cool easy thing that the average consumer can understand pretty quickly. But when you get into the system side, that's stuff that nobody sees. It's not a tangible thing, but those processes and systems that you follow and use in order to make, produce, launch, sell, and even end of life your product, that's where a lot of the biggest change happens.
Yeah, and that was something of a loaded question because I guarantee you most people don't think about the depth of what's involved in truly making something sustainable. It touches on every single aspect of product, sourcing of materials, the materials themselves, and where they're coming from. Yeah, just so many different aspects.
Well, it's one of those things that even today, companies that have these missions, you'll have, maybe the CEO one day goes, let's become sustainable. And, great, cool.
Yep.
But now your team's got to actually execute. And, at the end of the day, we all are consumers. Most of our lives are focused on that. And so walking through, the biggest hurdle is that kind of what I mentioned before, the 0 and 1, it doesn't really exist. And that's where a lot of companies kind of get hung up because they go, oh, well, we can't become sustainable tomorrow.
Right.
Now what? And that's,
it's
to what you said, there's so much, right? There's so much to do. It's a long project. We're talking about changing the entire system of your company on the manufacturing side, especially. And so it takes time. And so I end up doing a lot of kind of consulting and training on, okay, hey, this isn't a one-day thing. This isn't even necessarily a 1-year thing. This could take you 10 years. Like, get into an Apple example, I think they set a goal to be 100% recycled aluminum, and it took them 10 years or more to do that, right?
Yep.
And so that's Apple. They have billions and now trillions of dollars. Like, money wasn't the problem. They had that. It just takes time to do it without becoming unprofitable. And that's another hurdle that people try to do too much, too quickly, and that kills every business. It's I think it's business 101. You can't take on too much. You gotta.
Yeah. Well, and one thing I always hammer is that your best sustainability projects should pay for themselves. If you're cutting waste,
sustainability
that could be a money gainer, right?
If you do sustainability correctly, it should be more efficient.
Yeah. Yep.
And the other thing is, some of it is going to cost more investment up front.
Yep.
But if you're willing to look past Q1 of next year and
Right.
you actually look at the long term sustainability done right is efficient, and long term efficiency will win the race financially. It'll cost, right? I have upfront costs, but long term, you're going to have a lot more results to pay for it.
Yeah, exactly. Now, along those lines, you have a book called Conscious Design,
Yes.
and you do a podcast called the Conscious Design Podcast. So I'm going to go by the names there and think those two are kind of aligned.
Yeah. Yes.
See how
Yes, they
quickly I got
are.
to that?
Very intentionally. That wasn't an accident. I did think about that.
Wonderful.
Yeah, so basically, Conscious Design book was, I got asked the question absolutely in 2020 and ended up having some downtime because we lost a lot of clients during that time.
Oh,
And the question asked was, well, what's your process? What makes you actually special? Like, what's your, not in a mean way, like you're a
yeah.
nice person, but like, what is your process, and why is it different? Like, what
Yeah, your
makes you
point of
unique?
differentiation.
Exactly.
Yep.
And so I sat down, and instead of just answering the question, I wrote a book. And that, because I started writing down, well, here's the process. And as we were just talking about, if you actually sit down and write the process of developing a product and what I've been doing for the past 20 plus years, it's a book. It's not a small amount of information. It's not a small amount of steps. There's a lot that goes into it. And so by the time I wrote down like my process, and it basically turned into an outline for a book. And then I was like, okay, nobody wants to read 50 pages of product development process. How do I condense this into something that somebody would actually want to read? And so that's where Conscious Design and its principles came out. I was like, okay, if I were to put this into a useful, readable format, how does somebody, look at this as a design thinking process? And so that's where the book came about. I wrote it with my wife. We launched that, and kind of during that process, because I researched a lot of companies because I wanted examples of, hey,
Yep.
this is part of my process, but here's a company that's doing it really well. Like, look at them. That way there's references in real life, not just a guy talking about theory. And then through that, I started doing some podcasts as a guest. I really loved it. I liked talking to companies for my research. And I was like, well, I'll just combine these together. And so podcast was born, and now we interview companies that are sustainable focused physical product companies primarily, or people that work with them. And yeah, it's been going for 3 years now.
All right. Have you heard of the company Model Number, the furniture company?
Not that I know of.
Okay. I just wrote about them. They are using 3D printing and biodegradable, recycled, and compostable materials to push furniture into the direction of sustainability. So check them out. You
I
may want them
will.
on your show.
Absolutely.
It's funny because you had said something, and I forget exactly what it was, but it was almost the exact same thing. A friend of mine who's an artist and a sustainability guru in Pittsburgh, who I sought for comments about Model Number, said, and it was around some of that challenge of the different elements you have to change to be circular and sustainable.
Yes, it's a challenge, but achievable.
Well, and one that is worthwhile, and in the end, has a lot of different benefits. I'm going to shift gears on you. So I hear you also have an education publishing company.
Yes. Yeah. So that is actually basically
because you didn't have enough going on already.
Yeah, fortunately that one's kind of in the background.
Okay. Yep.
I still run it. It's small, but the story behind that is actually that the books that originally were created, they're called Complete a Sketch, is how my dad actually taught me how to draw when I was a kid.
Oh wow.
Is he made those for me, And then my mom is the one that said, hey, this works really well. We should try to get this made into a book and sell it to like homeschool groups and other schools and stuff. And
Yeah.
That's the start. And now it has, I think, 7 or 8 books, and it just sits there doing that. But its main products is all about teaching kids how to sketch technically. So not
That is really
flowers.
cool.
It's like how to make trucks and houses and floor plans and isometric, and you can print it, like draw stuff, print it out, like make a cube, flat patterning, that
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
that kind of technical stuff. But yeah, it all started from my dad teaching me when I was a kid.
That's really cool. What's the name of that company?
Insight Technical Education. Yeah.
Jotting down a note on that.
Yeah.
And then, going back to the podcast, do you typically have on companies that are working toward sustainability? You have experts on what's the focus of that?
The focus is kind of broad. The thread that I would say that connects them all is sustainability, but I try to have everyone on. So I've had people from governments that are talking about how is the government approaching sustainability? What are programs? Talk to people on the city level. We've had people on that support those. So we've had a couple PR companies that all they work with is sustainable product companies. So understanding like the PR and marketing side of sustainable products, because there's so much greenwashing. It is a great topic to dive into with experts in that field. I've had people on about sales and kind of really just broad around all the different components of making a successful, sustainable company. And so we've had Boxed Water. We had the head of design from Logitech was on talking about Logitech's approach and their approach. They have just their materials science group that finds or develops their sustainable material library. I think is like a team of 20 or 30, and they have like a $10 million a year budget or something like that. And that's all they do. All they do is sustainable materials. So earlier we were talking about materials. There's a lot. There's a lot to go into it. And then I talked to other companies that are like 4 people total. They make one product, and it's a totally different approach. They don't have 25 people figuring out materials for them. It's just them. So trying to show how different sizes of companies really approach this process, and it's I enjoy it because I get to learn a ton. It's great.
Well, and it really is fascinating. And you mentioned that the different sizes of companies. I'm thinking just in my own experience, I'm connected with a guy on LinkedIn who's doing sustainable beanies and T-shirts in North Carolina, doing his own, using local cotton and actually making his own dyes from the local black walnuts that he collects. So you got that kind of grassroots going on. But then I've also talked to the folks at Saint-Gobain, Certainteed, one of the biggest building products companies in the world, and they've got a huge focus on sustainable building materials. So there's just a lot of cool stuff going on in space.
Yeah, there's so much, and there's so many different ways. So I've had different people in the same industry, and it's interesting just to talk to 2 different people and their different approaches, different ways of thinking about things. They're solving the same problem. They're they might even consider themselves competitors, but they're solving it in such different ways that it kind of removes the competitor side of it.
Right.
Which is good. I mean, I think that's
for sure. Competition drives the best practices, right?
Exactly. And it's always interesting to see those dueling, and we'll figure out which one's a winning one. But it's always interesting to just see how many different ways people come up with to solve a particular problem.
Yeah.
Like just the building construction.
Oh, I'm sorry. Say that again. I kind of jumped in.
The construction material world. I've had quite a few people on there, and there's everything from using random fiber waste to mass timber to you name it. Like people are trying everything to see if it'll work. They're trying it. So
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned the mass timber thing. I got tied in with a few of those folks a few years ago, and it's a whole other world that is just driving forward in big ways that most people don't see.
yeah, yeah.
So very cool stuff.
A big one that I'm really exploring more right now is the biochar industry, which is a
Ah,
whole other not new.
right.
It's not
New
new,
ways though, right?
but new ways to make it, new uses for it. Like it's one of those interesting materials we're still figuring out uses for. The more I research about it and talk to people in biochar industry, there I learn a new application like every week right now. It's just
Wow.
it's fascinating,
Yeah.
fascinating to learn.
Yeah. Very cool. Going back to a comment you made early on, there's that whole um, sustainability piece around production itself, and I've actually got an article coming up in my Forbes column about Johnson Controls and some of the work they've been doing. They actually did a project in one of their own plants to revamp their whole utilities system and did it as a cost savings project. And so, where people are struggling with what to do, um, your talk about there being so many different elements, it really ought to spark people to say, yeah, okay, if we're not going after our product right now, what can we do with how we make it or what we make it from? There's just so many different opportunities.
Well, that comes, we say supply chain, right? And that is
Yeah.
like a loaded, a loaded word.
Right. Yeah. It's
There's
everything.
That's everything that happens before we ship a product out to a customer, basically.
Yep.
Some people even include that. They're like,
That's
supply
right.
chain doesn't
Yeah.
end until the consumer picks it up, opens it up, and starts using it, and it's
Yep.
not going back as a return item. That's
Right.
that's the end. That's the
You're
actual
not
end
getting
of
the
the
reverse logistics piece.
yeah, exactly. You can't ignore those people. They have a seat. So
Yep.
there's so much to it, and that's where I really drive this in as much as I can. Anybody who listens, basically, sustainability is efficiency. And
Yep.
if you just swap out the word efficiency into every place that somebody says sustainability, it makes more sense. People get it, and the hurdle of going, oh well, sustainability is so hard. Efficiency is easy. They're like, oh, this is great. This is a winning. They don't see it as a barrier sometimes. So I'll just
Yep.
kind of flip the script and tell people, hey, we're going to work on your efficiency, and then we go go work on all that, and we go, hey, you are now more sustainable. You've decreased carbon use. You've decreased this. Your waste is go down. Like this is sustainability. You think of it as efficiency, but they're the same thing. You should be.
Finish up. Sorry. Trying to jump
You should be. This is easy. You should be able to do this. It's not this. I think like there's still this mental hurdle that sustainability is expensive and not profitable, and is for charities and not a good business case. And that's we're like 20 years ago. Yeah, it was really hard, but at this point, there's so many materials. There's so much you can do. It's not as hard as it used to be. But I think the same people are running companies, and it was hard, and they haven't figured out that it's changed yet.
Yeah. Well, and I applaud your approach because it finds common ground. I'm going to speak for, kind of the old school manufacturing world that I came up in, and sustainability in some regards got a bad rap because of all the mandates that were pushed down on companies and things that did cost companies and in some cases drove companies out of business. And so they hang all that on the term sustainability. But to your point, and I love it, sustainability is efficiency. And manufacturers, therefore, have been doing sustainability forever. And that's where I love the Johnson Controls piece is they're going after something that, really ought to be something we're looking at constantly. Where are the costs that are hitting the bottom line and how do we reduce them? It could be that it's how you make your product, but it could also be your utilities or your operating system. There's so many different things. And so your point about it being so big and people get bogged down, you're simplifying it, I think, and finding that common ground will help cut through that thicket of resistance.
Well, and especially like it's retraining, right? When you
Sure.
have such negative connotation attached to a word, you got to retrain.
Yep.
Like that's
Yep.
how you do that. But you do that
Yeah.
by showing, hey,
Reframe.
we just did something. We increased your efficiency, we reduced waste. This improves your profits are increasing. Oh, by the way, this is sustain. Like when people are
Yeah.
wanting more sustainability, this is part of what they want. Yeah,
Yeah.
we also want you to use better materials, but like we're on the path there. So if the path there is we need to reduce waste to increase profit over here, so you can take a hit over here and get a better material, fine. We can still like it's doable. The math,
Yeah.
the math
Yeah.
is doable. You just
Right.
have to find the path though, and don't focus on the hardest thing to do necessarily. And I think
Yep.
that's the other thing. They'll go, well, it should be perfect on day one. Also, I'm going to
Yeah.
look at the biggest problem and I'm going to try to tackle the biggest problem possible. Like that's not how anybody really approaches anything successfully. You need to get some win momentum
Right.
and some buy-in. And that means doing things that are a little bit easier, getting some traction, finding the low-hanging fruit, right? Whatever euphemism we can find for do the easy stuff and get there. Take small bites. Don't
Yeah.
do too much.
I love that point about, it does not have to be perfect getting out of the gates.
Nobody is. There's no perfect system. So
Right.
drop
So
that
then,
theory that it exists and just improve. Constant
yeah,
improvement. What you were
constant.
saying.
Yep. Yep. Totally. Because you didn't have enough going on, you're also LA chapter chair of the Industrial Design Society of America.
Yeah. Yes. And that's actually we're LA and San Diego now because no one wanted to run the San Diego chapter. So my buddy and I, we run the chapter for the whole region, Southern California now. San Francisco has their own group. They still have somebody willing to do it
For now.
for now. I mean, if they quit, then I might just absorb them too and help. But, yeah, it's good though. We're part of we have student chapters and things like that, and yeah, it's pretty fortunately not too taxing on my time, but yeah, being part of it's fun. I enjoy it.
Cool. Yep. Now, I always finish up my interviews with what are the future opportunities. For you, it becomes a little obvious because you're working on the future. But I guess for that question for you, what are the next few years' focus areas going to be?
Yeah, I mean, we've started to get into working on projects in clean energy and
Yep.
alternatives. So we've done solar. We're looking at getting into wind right now. In developing, we have some potential partners there. We really want to get into those types of things larger. We've done a lot of products. We've done what we would consider small items. They're still important, but we'd love to we're getting more into technology, and we want to dive further into that and really pushing technologies and not just, products are cool. Love designing products, but every time we've been able to work on developing a technology, it's exciting to see the potential come from that. And so that's our big focus is really finding those companies that want to push technology and really develop out more technology bases that other people can use, right? It's that's where you make really big change, is creating a new technology platform of some kind that allows other companies to go, hey, we want to use that, like batteries, for example, right? Or solar panels, like developing those things. Other people can do more good with your product than you could just do just by yourself.
Good deal. Got it. Anything we haven't hit on that you wanted to cover?
No, I think that covers almost everything I do. So
Well, good.
I have a family, and keep all I keep busy for sure.
You're a family man too. So yeah, I applaud you.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Well,
Great being here.
Ian, yeah, thank you for being here. It was really fascinating and educational.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for having me. This has been fun.
I'll include links to all the various things we talked about in the show description, so folks, you can go look up some of this stuff for yourself. But yeah, I just found everything Ian brought us to be extremely informative, and we're here every Tuesday and now most Thursdays. So thanks to you guys in the audience as well. We'll be here for you, and I can't promise it's all going to be as informative as what Ian brought, but it's all at least going to be a little informative. So come on back. But for now, Jim Vinosky with Manufacturing Talks, signing off. Thanks again, Ian.
Thanks for tuning in to Manufacturing Talks with Jim Vinosky. Watch for new episodes dropping every Tuesday. And don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe.